mine got passed, and hers didn't. Number two, and then we'll go through all the differences. Thanks so much. Great question.
Okay, the next question here from Jim from Clinton.
Governor, first of all, I want to thank you for coming to Clinton. I've heard a lot of the candidates, both Democrats and Republicans, talk about domestic policies. On foreign policy, what's your stance with the United Nations and a lost treaty and domestic courts, or I'm sorry, international courts telling our courts that they can't do what they're doing?
Well, the United Nations has failed. It's failed to stop genocide. The United Nations has failed to stop conflicts throughout the world. It's failed to identify human rights abuses and to stop them. I was just yesterday in Washington, D.C., speaking to a group and spoke about the extraordinary failure, really the outrage that's come from the United Nations Human Rights Council. They sanction various countries for human rights abuses. They've sanctioned Israel 9 times. But somehow they haven't found it in their heart to sanction Darfur or Sudan or Burma or Syria or Cuba. Somehow those nations don't seem to have a problem. Well, I announced yesterday that it's my view we should pull out of the United Nations Human Rights Council and stop sending money to that effort entirely. And make it Are we going to continue to have a place like the United Nations where the world can talk? Yes, but we're going to have to create our own entities, our own alliances, and I think we need to bring together all the free nations of the earth so we can come together and act when there are areas of outrage or when there are attacks that affect us. And so I see us creating new partnerships, new alliances, some regional, some global, that bring together on the global basis free nations that have the same values. The reason the United Nations has been so unsuccessful is that so many of the members of the United Nations just don't believe in the values and the purposes of the United Nations. And as long as that's the case, it's going to be ineffective. So we're going to have to create some other vehicles to talk and make change amongst ourselves. And then with regards to our own sovereignty, like as you know, there's some pieces of worldwide global effort to that would in some way affect our sovereignty on the seas, for instance, and in international courts. And it's important for us to be very, very careful and not to enter into something which keeps the superpower of the planet, us, from being able to exercise our will and our interests and protect our interests and preserve the nation and preserve the world. And I mentioned how safe our world is. Let me just underscore, in part because of our strength, let me just mention something I heard from Shimon Peres, the former Prime Minister of Israel. He said, well, he was asked, what do you think about the war in Iraq? And he said, America is unique in the history of the world. Unique. He said, in the history of the world, whenever there's been war, the nation that wins takes land from the nation that loses, because land is the source of value on the planet. One nation in history, he said, has laid down hundreds of thousands of lives and taken no land. No land from Germany, no land from Japan, no land from Korea. America. America is unique in the history of the world. Colin Powell pointed out the only land we took during that last great conflict was enough land to bury our dead. This is a unique nation. It is essential this nation remain strong. As I said, with strong families and a strong economy and a strong military. It's also essential that we don't allow ourselves to get tied up by Lilliputians that would keep us from being able to exercise that strength as needed to help preserve our interests and the safety of the world. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
The environment is the big issue today. What's your stance on Kyoto?
Stance on Kyoto and the environment. Kyoto was a bad idea, or I should say it was a bad piece of work by the time it got finished, because what Kyoto would do is, as you know, is that it would place very significant restrictions on greenhouse gas emissions from certain countries, but not on others. And as a matter of fact, the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas had no restrictions. That was China. And China's growing like crazy, building new power plants, big coal power plants. It is, you can't believe how dirty it is there. How much sulfur is in the air, how much pollution is in the air in China. I've been to Beijing. Wow. I mean, it's like the worst day in Los Angeles every day in Beijing. And so to say, look, we're gonna put a cap on one country but not on another would just mean that the energy intensive industries would move from a country like ours and with the good jobs they provide, and would take them and go to places like China where they wouldn't have those restrictions. That makes no sense, because they don't call it America warming, they call it global warming. And so you have to have something on a global basis. And if we're going to work to improve our greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to have to be done globally. And that's something I'll work on a global basis. There is something we can do, however, domestically, all by ourselves, requires no one else's involvement, that would significantly improve greenhouse gas emissions from our country, and that is becoming energy independent. And becoming energy independent, from my view, is important for other reasons. One is, I don't want to be sending all this money to people who use that money in some cases against us. It's bad for our foreign policy to send money to Ahmadinejad and Chavez and Putin. And I also want to make our economy stronger. Sending that money out of our economy doesn't help. And so I want to become energy independent, and that means all of our renewable resources, biodiesel, biofuel, ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, solar, wind, nuclear, liquefied coal, where we sequester the CO2, means more efficiency in our cars, but let's become, and our homes and businesses, let's become energy independent. That's the right way for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And by the way, as we become energy independent, that'll help our economy, not hurt it. Thank you. Over here, yes.
Hi, I'm president of Prevent Child Abuse for Clinton County, and so I see the family units disintegrating and how families struggle just to make ends meet. And with the recent S-chip issue, a lot of people are very, very concerned just to get health care for their children. So I want to know where you stood with that particular issue and where children's issues fall in your priority.
Well, I said at the outset, number one, strengthen families. And so I'd love to get your thoughts about what are the biggest issues you see as you deal with the families in distress. Take that microphone back. Yeah. What are the concerns that you see as you look at the kids that are having the greatest difficulty?
The parents are ending up with 2 and 3 minimum wage jobs, even with minimum wage increases. They're really not spending time with their families. The kids don't really have a structural support. A lot of times there's no transportation to get to services that are available, and a lot of the parents are just finding themselves on medications that they can't afford, and because they're working part-time jobs with no benefits, and then they're just trying to get their kids to the hospital only when needed, because something's going to have to come out of pocket. So they find themselves in just a horrible circle.
Well, that's why you'd like what we did in our state. You would like what we were talking about with regards to health care, because everybody in our state gets health insurance. It's not given to them by the government. So if you got, let's say you got a family earning $12,000 a year, or $15,000 or $20,000 a year, which is not enough to be able to buy a private policy. We help them buy. They pay what they can afford. We have a sliding scale based on what they can afford: $5 a week, $10 a week, and then we pay the rest. And you might say, well, where'd you get the money to pay that extra amount? The answer is, it costs us less money to help people buy insurance than it was costing us giving out free care in the hospitals. So we took it's the money we used to be giving to hospitals and said, let's let people buy insurance with it instead. So we got everybody insured. What that means is that people can go to the clinic, they can get primary care before it gets severe and they end up in the hospital. And I also believe that if you've got people earning multiple jobs, it really helps if you got 2 parents. You probably, I don't know how many, if you got 2 parents, boy, that's a big plus, where one can help out with the kids, and when you're at the wit's end, the other one can take over. I don't know anything more. By the way, hats off to Bill Cosby the other day. You may have heard him talking about marriage and family. Probably, at least where I spent the last 30 years in Massachusetts, boy, if you could have more married couples in the inner city, boy, that'd be a huge plus for our kids. And have 2 couples or 2 people earning the money. But then you have to fight for good jobs and do our best to, instead of seeing jobs going offshore, do our best to bring jobs here. And that's something I'll fight for. I spent my life in the private sector. I can't tell you that I can cause companies to come back here, but I can make sure this is the environment they'll want to